Ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask you in the auditorium to make your way back in. We've got about 30 seconds, and then we'll get everybody in from the auditorium and gathered for the plenary session as we continue on part 2 of the morning program. Just bear with me while we get everybody in from the outside so I don't have to repeat. I'm going to start calling out people by name just to embarrass them. That'll get them in a bit quicker. Paul King, CIO, you're late. To be fair, Paul's 6'7" and it's pretty difficult to miss. So, okay, hopefully everyone's recharged with energy bars and caffeine, etc. I promised that we were going to start off the second session with some insight from further afield. So I'll come on to Wes Scott's background shortly, but I'll remind you again, get the text number. We might be able to push the text number up on the screen now if we have the flexibility to put the text number up. That text number is going to be up on the screen for the second half of the plenary session. And when you see the text number up there, then start using the text number to get your questions in. Gord Wainwright, CHC helicopter, you are late. I haven't got eye contact yet. Gord Wainwright, CHC helicopter, you're late. I've got eye contact. Okay, when he comes in, I'd like to give him a round of applause. I'll introduce him. Ladies and gentlemen, Gord Wainwright, the late Gord Wainwright, there he is. Gord's in charge of our risk management, but not our timekeeping department, otherwise we'd be in big trouble. So, Gord, I think you're almost last in. If you could just close the doors when you come, that'd be great, thanks. As I was saying before, I rudely interrupted myself. So the text number is going to be up on the screen, as you see. Use the number, text in, get your questions. They're going to be fed up onto the monitor here, and Scott Shappell, the facilitator, will sift through them and guide the conversation in the appropriate way. We've got a fantastic range of presenters for the plenary session. Wes, who I'm just about to introduce, comes from the National Safety Council, has a military background, has some great insight into a number of other industries, not just aviation, because one of the important things for the plenary was to try and get people from a wide range of backgrounds so that we can talk about safety and how it's done elsewhere, because we certainly haven't got all the answers. We've got a lot of answers in the aviation world, but certainly not all of them. So going to construction, going to the transport infrastructure, the railways, the nuclear industry, all of that, and indeed the military background as well, because some people think that the military are very gung-ho and risk is something that they just take as part of their daily life. That's not so. And they practice and practice and practice and have a rigorous approach to standards, which sometimes in the commercial world you don't always see. So there's lessons to be drawn from there as well. Okay, I believe that we have all of the cats back in the cattery. So thank you very much for your attention this morning to date. I'd like to introduce Dr. Wes Scott. As I said, he's got a broad background with 30 years experience in biomedical engineering, environmental and occupational safety and health fields. He worked at the US Army Corps of Engineers and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, where he provided leadership and technical direction for disaster assessment and relief. He developed structural theories and solutions. He's done a lot of work in the training department and also implemented safety programs in 20 locations. And he'll be able to talk with reference to cultural differences as well. Depending on where you go in the world, there are some cultural hurdles that we need to get over and some cultural strengths as well that would be well to be adopted in the areas where we work. As Consultant Services Director at the National Safety Council, Wes provides oversight for consulting in core, course and other occupational training instruction for open enrollment and on-site programs, as well as providing technical and curriculum input for the development, implementation and modification of occupational safety and health training programs. So, Dr. Wes Scott will now ask you to come up and give your presentation, and then Wes has kindly agreed to take part in the plenary discussion after. Wes.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everyone. So I promised my kids I'd send them a picture of me working today, so we're going to do a selfie. Everybody smile. All right, ready? Seems like everywhere we go, they have their cell phones out, and that's what they want to do is take pictures, so and text and so forth. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, but it is good being here. I'm going to drive that camera guy nuts because I will not stand in one spot. I'm trying to avoid getting my picture taken. So I'm going to stand over here. Can you get me now? All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about safety leadership and engagement, and I want to take this from the perspective of going across different fields. So it isn't going to just be safety and health from the aviation standpoint, but other fields as well. And the one thing I will say is that no matter where you work, no matter what field you work in, safety and health really is about the same. I do have some aviation experience. I'm a fixed wing kind of guy, although I will admit I was never the pilot. I was always the guy with the parachute strapped to him and they threw out the door in the back. And then when I did get a chance to ride in helicopters, I was like, finally, something a little bit safer than a C-130. They made me rappel out of Black Hawk helicopters. So I have some aviation experience. There you have it. All right, so as soon as we can figure out what makes this slide work, then we're going to get started. All right, I think we missed a couple because I was hitting this button. All right, it's my fault. So we all good now? We ready to go for a ride? Since I am based in the U.S., I'll use U.S. statistics, but my experience is that U.S. statistics are kind of mirrored no matter where you go in the world, and the culture does make a little bit of a difference. Part of my role is with the National Safety Council is to travel quite a bit, and I spent about 9 months last year in Egypt and in the GCC, so throughout the Middle East as well as in Latin America, so a good bit of my time is spent on the road, so it's great to be here. But last year, or excuse me, in 2012, as I looked at those statistics for what has been going on in the U.S., what we found out was that they spent over $730 billion just responding to injuries, just trying to get people healthy after injuries. And those are costs that are direct costs, that those are paid either directly by the employer, even if the insurance company pays it, ultimately that is a direct cost back to the employer. And the result of that is there has to be a higher price for goods and services, and as a result of that, we say that safety, being unsafe is costly. We'll talk a little bit more about what that really means, but that gives you some indication. If you look at where workplace injuries and fatalities, in the U.S. they had about 4,000 workplace fatalities last year. The year prior to that, 4,500. So a lot of people are dying going to work, and you say, well, that's a lot of folks. Well, it is. It's significantly better than we were 20 years ago. It has continually gone down, but as you look over the last few years, it's plateaued. And I think that across many industries and across many places in the Western and civilized world, we're seeing similar challenges where we've driven workplace injuries down, we've driven fatalities down, but they've kind of flattened out because we're wondering what do we do next? Compliance helps us get there. Compliance does absolutely help us get there. But once you are in compliance, what's next? And that's when we start talking about management systems and culture and behaviors and some of those things. So we're going to talk about what we can do about some of those. In the U.S., and so I have to keep emphasizing that these are U.S. numbers, but there may be similar numbers in Canada and UK and throughout Europe and so forth. We find that a good bit of our incidents happen on the highway. And then we have other things like people falling down, and sadly there's homicides in the workplace as well. We have not necessarily as much where people are just walking into workplaces with weapons, but that's not an impossibility. But we do have taxi drivers who stuff $40 in their sock, and in the middle of the night, they're accosted to try to retrieve that money from them. or we have convenience stores that are open 24 hours, and people go into there in the middle of the night and say, give me everything in the register, and then that clerk resists, and certainly that's a poor outcome. So even those are considered workplace issues as well. When we look at, there's a term I'm using up here, and it's OSHA recordable cases, and all that means is that as an injury, you've required treatment with your injury beyond first aid. So you had to go see a doctor to get that treatment. Well, there were about 3.1 million of those OSHA recordable cases last year. So that's a lot of folks getting hurt, going to the doctor. And we have to say, what does that really mean? Well, that means that there is, at the end of the day, an impact on our business. If somebody's sitting in a doctor's office or they're sitting at home recuperating, then the net result of that is that there's an impact on our business. We're paying them not to work. And so the impact on that business is we may have some challenges with productivity. We may have some challenges with quality. It's going to cost us more to do what we do. So we really don't want to get folks hurt. And so it comes back to, why do we even care? Why is this a big deal? Why do we care about safety and health? Well, as a key business value, as we should be thinking of this right along with the rest of our strategic initiatives within our business. And when we look back at operational excellence and say, what does that mean and what does that look like? Safety cannot be excluded from that discussion. When we look at human performance and how do we get the best out of what people are doing, we can't exclude safety from that discussion. When we look at public relations and how we look to our partners and how we look to our stakeholders, we cannot remove safety from that discussion. And it goes the same by community vitality and environmental sustainability. You cannot have those things and you cannot do those things without including safety in that conversation. You know, I hope I'm older than I look. I don't know if I am or not. But I will tell you that I first joined the military right out of college. I went to college. I had an academic scholarship. I was 15 actually when I qualified to go to college. I graduated high school, went to college. I had a full ride academic scholarship to a very good school, but I absolutely hated the school. And the reason for that was this school is known for its athletic prowess. And they had really good football teams, not European football, you know, kind with pads on, all right? So they had a really, really good football team, and so they would recruit and spend a lot of money to get good football players at this college. The problem is they only had one dorm that was for scholarship recipients. So you have this 15-year-old nerd in a room with 3 jocks. And so at the end of the day, you know, I'm trying to study to get ready for the next day, and they were talking about more beer. And so that wasn't the best environment, and I begged my parents, please let me go to another school. And they were like, nope, you're staying there, and they would not let me go to another school. And so I left the school eventually when I made a deal with my parents, and that deal was if I found another way to pay for college, I could then go to another school. And they did allow me then to change schools. And the way I found to pay for it was to join the military, because this was post-Vietnam era. People were not volunteering to go in the military, and the military said, hey, we'll give you a whole bunch of money as a signing bonus, and we'll pay for college for you. And I have to say that I'm very thankful to the taxpayers in the U.S. because I was able to earn a master's degree and 2 doctorates and never paid a penny for my education. And so that's a very good thing from my perspective. But the one thing that, the reason where I'm going with this is in that time, when I first joined the military, the whole idea of regulating safety and health in the workplace was in its infancy stages. In the U.S., the Occupational Safety and Health Administration did not come into existence until 1970. So as you can imagine, by the end of the 70s and the early 80s, when I was really starting out, talking about safety and health was a conversation that says, if you get hurt, we will address that. Or the conversation to us was, be careful out there. If you think about that today and you say, if you just told somebody, be careful out there, and didn't give them the tools or the resources they needed to do that, we're really selling ourselves short, and we're really setting them up for failure. And I think that over the last 40 plus years, that at least in the U.S., where the Occupational Safety and Health Administration has been around, whether you like what they do or not, there is a reality, and that is that there is a greater level of awareness, and there is an understanding that within our businesses we have to do things just a little bit differently in order to remain competitive and to keep our employees safe. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that really means. As soon as my slide comes up, I'll show you what I have to say next. All right. So there are some motivators, and one of the things that I will say that we have to think about when we say motivators is, why do we care about safety and health? That conversation is not the same for everyone. If you were to say, wow, we need to do better in safety and health because last year we spent $500,000 in workers' comp payments or insurance or whatever that is, and you said we spent all that money, then that's good to know. That's absolutely good to know. But would you go to the guy who's fueling up your aircraft and tell him, be safe because last year we spent $500 million or $500,000 in workers' comp? I think that's not a good conversation to have with them. It doesn't matter to him. By the same token, I've run into folks and I'd say, what is important to you about safety and health? Why do you think it's important? So I'm going to ask this group by show of hands, how many of you think that safety and health is the right thing to do because there's a financial payback to the organization if we manage it correctly? Anybody think that? There should be some hands up, and it's okay to think that. It is absolutely 100% okay to think that. Because that is a truth, that is a reality. But let me just go to the next one. How many of you think that there is a humanistic element? We believe in safety and health because we care about the people we work with. And so there should be some hands up there. Now, that's good. I saw a lot of hands go up. The next one is regulatory, and I have public relations and employee labor relations, and those speak for themselves. But let me just tell you, if, for example, you tell somebody we need to do this differently, and you try to convince them, their response to you might be, show me in writing, show me a regulation that says I have to do that. I don't care how hard you try, they will not change how they feel or what they're doing until you address that issue. And I own my own business, and it's outside of safety field, it has nothing to do with it. When I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my second career and what I wanted to do to kind of give back to the community I grew up in, I started a youth leadership academy. I have children in there that are basically from ages 12 to 18, and so that range in their school years. And if they stick with me in my academy through their 12th grade until they're ready to enter into college, I pay for college for them. And that's not the important part of this. The important part of this is I have another job. I work for the National Safety Council. And if I want to pay for them to go to school, I got to find out a way to get that money, and so we look for grants and support and that kind of stuff. But I also needed to hire somebody to run the day-to-day operations. I hired this wonderful lady. She has 2 doctorates. She has one in child psychology and one in education. And I think that she's absolutely awesome and the right person for this job. But if you've ever read that book, Women Are From Venus and Men Are From Mars, or however that goes, that describes us perfectly. So let me tell you why I say that describes us perfectly. About 2 weeks after I hired her, I gave her the strategic plan for the organization that the board and I worked through. I gave it to her and said, please share this with our staff. I want you to get to know it, but I want you to share it with the staff. I want everybody to be able to read this, understand it, support it, know why we're doing some of the things that we're doing. And she said, great. Well, here's how the next conversation went. I said, hey, when you get ready to do that, call me. I'll come to the meeting, because if they have questions, I can be there and I can answer the questions, because you weren't there when we did the plan, so I can probably articulate that better. And she said, great, I'll do that. I'll call you. So I get the call, and she says, Dr. Scott, I just wanted you to know we're going to have the meeting. I said, good. I said, when is it going to be? She goes, well, I decided to do it on Saturday. We're going to have it at my house. I thought I'd buy some wine and some cheese, and we'll sit around and we'll talk a little bit. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she says, oh, you know that little thing you told me to do with talk about the strategic plan? I thought I'd bring everybody in and we'd do some team building exercises, and we could be the glue that brings the organization together. And I was like, you are so fired, because I didn't understand that. And the reason I didn't understand that is because she was speaking a foreign language to me. She was not motivating me with that conversation. And if you were to ask me what I think about, I care about kids, I care about their development, I care about what happens to them, but from the business perspective, it's got to make sense to me. I am a scientist. I am a left brain data junkie. Show me numbers, show me facts, show me statistics. I am not emotional. I have nothing to do with that touchy-feely crap. So I do not want to hear that. And so that made me realize that if I need to talk to, and I do this all the time, go to a CEO and say, this is what you need to do, then I need to figure out what's important to him or her. Because if I'm talking about something that's not important to them, it does not matter. So think about how many times you've had that conversation about things we need to do better. And then you say, wow, I put it all out there and they just didn't get it. It's because whatever you were talking about, what was important to you. But in the business world, you sometimes have to say, how do I frame this so I'm talking about what's important to them, to whoever you're talking to. And that's what I mean about understand the motivators. And if it's finances, talk money. If it's humanistic, then talk about people. If it is regulations and standards and all that by-the-book stuff, then absolutely have that conversation. Just recently, I did some work with the FBI in the U.S., and so I got a call from the Attorney General who says, I need you to help us develop an overarching safety plan for the Department of Justice. Well, Department of Justice has lots of folks in it. They have the FBI, and they have alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, and DEA, and all kinds of other folks that are part of this group. Well, when I gave it to him, he says, this is a great plan. Let me let some of my leaders and some of the other organizations take a look at it. And then he calls me back and he goes, your plan sucks, because they hated it. And I said, well, why? And there was one thing in there that they took exception to. And that was before I wrote their plan, I did some research and I said, in my mind, let's put things in the plan that make sense based on their exposures. And they had a lot of vehicle accidents and a lot of fatalities and serious injuries associated with the use of vehicles in their professional work, specifically the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigations. Their pushback was there is nothing in a federal standard that says we have to offer defensive driver training, and that was what was in my plan, was to give them defensive driver training every 3 years, and they absolutely rejected it. And I said, well, how about just do it because it's the right thing to do? And they were like, nope, show me in writing where it says I have to train people on driving the car. And I said, but you killed 1,700 agents in the last 3 years. Maybe that's enough. And he was like, I said, show me in writing. And I just want to tell you that not only didn't that conversation go well, but I have now been audited by the Internal Revenue Service for the last 3 years. All right. So when we talk about safety and why we do it, we do have to recognize that it is good for business. It is absolutely good for business. And so our route here should be that continuous drive to zero. We want to get to zero. Zero can mean a lot of things, but ultimately let's send everybody home in the same way they came to work. But in order to do that, we need to empower folks, and we need to check ourselves and see if we're doing the right things. And we need to think about that whole mindset of continuous improvement, because that's important. But we get things out of that. It isn't just that the company makes money. That's good, but we also get improved employee relations. I think that that's great and that's wonderful. And we get improved productivity and reduced costs. And no matter what kind of business you're in the business to make money. Let's not mistake that. I know that safety professionals, when they get in the room, it's all about me. You know, it's all about safety. And let's talk about safety and safety, safety, safety. But I don't care what kind of business you're in, it makes no difference. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that others get a good quality goods or service from us, and we want money in return. So to say that if we're safe, we can improve productivity and reduce costs, I think that that is a benefit that everybody can get on board with. And then we want improved quality. I don't care how much you make of something, if you don't make good stuff, nobody wants it. So we also have to think of it from that perspective, and we want enhanced public image. I sometimes will run this test on folks, and I'll say, if I say to you Exxon, what's the next word that comes to mind? Anybody want to throw something out? It works here too. And I'm not saying, trust me, I'm not saying Exxon did anything right, wrong, or different. It's not about that conversation. But it is about the fact that we remember enough about them to have questions about whether, about their performance. We have questions. And some of that's fueled by what the newspapers and the TV reports and all that had to say. At the end of the day, they had to definitely worry about their public image. Anybody here drive a Toyota in here? Any Toyota drivers? Yep, I'm sorry for you, but anyway. For those Toyota drivers in here, it wasn't that long ago, particularly if you had a Camry, where they were talking about the accelerator pedal sticking and that kind of stuff. And so Toyota tried to dodge that bullet for a while, and it worked for a little while, but then it caught up with them, and they finally had to address it. And they were, I have twin daughters, and I bought them a Toyota to use and to drive back and forth to school. And let's see, we got a new starter, a new gas pedal, new brake pedal switch, new floor mats. We got a whole lot of new stuff just because Toyota wanted to be exceptionally nice to us in order to gain back our favor. And so I've since gotten rid of that car and gotten something else, but I get these letters weekly about how they can make me this really good deal if I'll come back into the fold. So even though it's the #1 selling sedan in the world right now, they're still suffering a little bit. Their public image suffered because of how they addressed that one simple issue and delaying the recall. So there is an economic burden on our profits when we have issues within our organization. And I'm going to specifically talk about somebody getting hurt. There is a such thing as a minor injury. If somebody gets something in their eyes and you send them to the doctor and you say, okay, flush it out and put a little something in there so they'll reduce the irritation and then send them back to work, it's reasonable that might cost around $500. Don't know what your profit margin is, but I just use 1% as my example, and you can use certainly any number you want. But at a 1% profit margin, do you realize that you got to have nearly $50,000 in sales? That means your goods or services that you distribute in order to get that back. And the reason for that is because when you have those injuries, the only money we can spend is the money that's our net profit. What's the money that we get to keep? And so at 1%, that makes that a very large number there. But just think of it this way. If your company was in the business to make soap, you made bars of soap, and let's just say that for every bar of soap that you make, you sell it for $1, one single dollar. Well, at a 1% profit margin, that means 99 cents goes to paying for overhead expenses, raw materials, keeping the lights on, production, distribution, marketing, all of that stuff. That's where that other 99 cents goes. So think of this in terms of that $500 injury and then say how many bars of soap at 1%, at 1 cent per bar, do I have to distribute in order to get that soap back? We have to sell a whole bunch of 50,000 bars of soap in order to get that injury paid for. Now, what if it's a $5,000 injury? What if it's a $10,000 injury? What if it's a $50,000 injury? What does that mean to our bottom line? And I don't think we often think of that. We just think of it's $500, here's the money, pay the bill. But, the reality is how hard did we work to get that? Some of the companies that I work with, they actually do that, and they'll look at last year's injury rates and statistics, and then what they'll do is they'll start backing that off, and they'll say, all right, how many months did we operate before we were able to pay for all of our injuries and illnesses from the previous year? And you'd be surprised how long that is, how deep that takes you into your fiscal year to recover that money. And one of the reasons that we don't always get that full picture of what that injury or incident cost us is because we only think about what are the direct costs. And the direct costs are easy. The direct costs are, if you get hurt, let's get you to the doctor and get that taken care of. We write a check. And then there's probably, if you have to stay home for a while, then we'll send you a check to your house so that you don't lose any money there. So we do that. That's not a big deal. And then there's the legal cost. And so my long-running joke in the U.S. is when we send people home to heal, they sit on their couch and they eat bonbons and they watch Jerry Springer. And so while they're watching Jerry Springer, what always happens is there's a commercial that comes on that says, "Did you get hurt at work? Dial 1-800, sue your boss." So that's where the legal costs come from. And if you could just get those Jerry Springer commercials off, that we'd probably do much better. But litigation costs are expensive, and they definitely are part of that overall direct cost of the injury or illness. But then there are some indirect costs. What's your name, sir? Ken. All right, I'm going to randomly pick a name. Ken. All right, and Ken was working on a piece of equipment. And this piece of equipment rotates around, and all of you, by the way, are working on either side of Ken. And then Ken sticks his finger in the machine, and then something bad happens. He feels a little bit of a pain. He pulls his hand back. He takes a look, and the tip of his finger has just been sliced. And so Ken's going to then say, hey, something just happened to me. What he's going to really do is scream like a little girl. But then he's going to pull his hand back. He's going to be bleeding. And all of you are going to look over there and say, Ken must have cut the tip of his finger off. And then you're going to keep working, right? No, I don't think so. Are you going to keep working? No? Here's what we're really going to do. One of you is going to do the right thing and run over there and say, let's put pressure on it. Let's find that tip of your finger. Let's put it on ice. Let's get you to the doctor. The rest of you are going to be giving instructions instead of working. And then you're going to follow the ambulance. You're going to walk out there like the guys that came in to get Ken don't remember where they parked. So you're all going to follow him and then you're going to watch the ambulance go down the street. And the thing about that is you are doing that instead of your jobs. And even after Ken is gone, even after the doctor's taken care of business, we are still going to be wondering about what happened to Ken. And then we're going to be telling the story to each other. And everybody's going to tell a different version of the story. There is the version that says Ken got his finger caught in a piece of rotating machinery, but then some of you are going to include a chainsaw in it, and there's going to be all these other things that we're going to be sharing. The reason I bring that up is because instead of doing your jobs, you're talking about what just happened to Ken. And so when we think about those direct and indirect costs, we are now paying you to look at what's happening to Ken and to talk about what's happening to Ken. That's an indirect cost. Somebody is cleaning up the blood. That's a cost. Somebody is cleaning the machine off and making sure the machine is okay. That's a cost. Somebody is filling out paperwork. That's a cost. Somebody is reviewing the paperwork and now investigating the incident. That's a cost. And now we take this out of the workplace and let's go home. There is going to be a difference in the quality of life that Ken is going to experience. That's a cost. And it's going to impact him as well as his family. The other workers that were around him are going to have some challenges when it comes to morale. they're not going to be as excited about working around that equipment because they think that it's a carnivore, and they say, can I be next? And so there's all of these things that are going on. I don't know what the magic number is, but I will tell you that Liberty Mutual did a study just a couple of years ago, and they put that number anywhere between 3 and 10 times the direct cost. And so what we're saying here is that for every dollar you know you spent, you can have up to $10 of cost that you didn't really know that you were going to spend. And what does that really mean? That $500 injury now may be a $5,000 injury, and that $5,000 injury, may be, when you look at the economic burden of a $5,000 injury, what does that payback look like to us? And so I just wanted to bring those things up and just get you to think about those direct and indirect costs of it. So let's see if we can get a slide. There we go. And let's look at the impact on the bottom line. If you can prevent a lost time injury, you can save about $37,000 on your bottom line from that. And that's just simply by preventing. So, prevention or avoidance of the injury definitely has a payback. We can save about $1.3 to $1.4 million if you don't kill anybody. And if you look at your profit margin, anywhere between $740,000 or $27 to $27 million, it really depends on where we are, but that's the difference. And for every dollar that you invest in safety, you can get anywhere from like $3 to $6 a return on that investment. And that's a difficult conversation to have with folks, to say, we spend money to be safe, but we get something back. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. I had somebody call me recently and said, we just got bought out by a new company. They want us to do all this safety stuff. They sent us a document, and we self-audited, and we sent it back to them, and they fared poorly based on that self-audit. And so the company is now requiring them to put a safety management system into place, and in requiring them to do things to change the culture. They don't even have a full-time safety person at the organization. So what they called me for is, says, can you consult with us for a few weeks or a few months or whatever it takes in order to make our parent company happy? And I said, yeah, I can do that, but it would be a whole lot more cost effective if you just hire somebody to do that, because I'm pretty sure that you would not pay them what you would have to pay me in a very short time. What you'd pay me by the day to come in and work that for you, by the time I got done, you'd probably pay for a couple of full-time people. And so the response from this CEO was, yeah, that safety thing, it's just a gimmick to try to get our money. And I thought, well, I'm really trying not to take your money, but if you just want to give it to me, that's okay. But the bottom line is sometimes we see what we do for safety as a cost, as a straight-up cost to the organization, and we fail to realize that there are benefits, that we get things back. So there was a poll, and we looked at 95% of the executives that responded in this poll really do understand that safety and health has a positive impact on the bottom line for a company, on their financial performance. But there's 5% clearly who still don't get it. And I'm pretty sure that gentleman I spoke to is in that 5%. He just doesn't get that. Investors kind of like to see companies that do well in safety and health. Sometimes they pick their stocks based on those companies. We have, at the National Safety Council, one of the things that we do is we sponsor an award. It's an international award for safety. It's simply called the Robert W. Campbell Award, and you can Google it at your leisure. But since 2004, when we started giving this award, we've had about 12 or 13 winners, maybe a couple more, but nonetheless, we have this great list and this great grouping of these high-performing companies, and they include DuPont and Dow Chemical and United Technologies, Fire and Security, and they have Chubb rolled in with them. We have a company out of Switzerland called Firmenich, and we have Johnson & Johnson, and these are absolute leaders in safety and health. There's absolutely no question about the rigor of their programs and what they're doing. But when I was talking to them, we have an annual banquet to bring all of these winners together and then to announce the winner for the next year. And I just, as a question, I just asked them, hey, is there some difference that you're seeing in your organization? What are some of the things that you've seen by winning this award? Because they get a chance to make a big deal out of it. And I had two of them say, you know what, our stock price has gone up, and we get people calling us because for two reasons. One, they like that we have embraced safety and health, but the other side of it is they get calls and say, hey, can you come help us do well, because we want our companies to perform well also. And I think that that's a testament to what that really means and what that really is doing for companies, that there is that bottom line impact, but nonetheless, others want the same thing. They want to be able to do the same things. And we look at management leadership and commitment. I have to say that nothing works if the boss doesn't care about it. If the boss cares about it, we have a pretty good chance of getting others to care. But if you've ever been in an organization where the leadership is lukewarm about that whole thing about safety and health, if they're lukewarm about that, that's what everybody else is going to be. You know, just like I do, whatever your boss thinks is important is what you think is important. But when it comes to safety and health, we definitely need to drive this from the top down. There's no doubt about that. But you have to realize that there is a bottom-up approach that we need to take as well. That needs to be not only do I need to tell you as the leaders what the expectations are and to set you up for success, but I also have to listen to everybody within the organization. If you had to really look at a cross-section of your organization and say, who are the subject matter experts, you know, and I like to use the term, the folks with the boots on the ground. It is the folks who do the work every single day. And so if we think about that, then why not value their input? Why not use that information? Why not use their energy to help us get better? Oh, Ken, by the way, your finger grew back, so you're all better now. All right, good. Culture is elusive. I was just at Princeton on Friday in New Jersey, and somebody asked me, how would I define culture? Because they asked me to come there and specifically talk to them about some of the things that they could do to improve what they were doing. And I was more than happy to do it, and I had a couple hundred folks in the room. And so the question was, how do I define culture? And that really put me on the spot because I'm used to asking others, how would you define culture and what does that mean to you? But they threw it back at me and they said, well, how would I define it? And I thought about it for a moment and I said, well, I like to call it instinct. It's what we do in absence of folks just telling us what to do. And so let's think about that for a moment. If you were to get into your automobile, you would just jump in that driver's seat, you'd reach over and you'd pull that seatbelt and you'd put it on, I'm assuming. How many of you do not wear seatbelts in here? Anybody? Okay, good. No hands went up. I saw one went like this, but then he looked around and he was like, okay, I better not tell that. But most of us wear seatbelts. Most of us wear seatbelts. And the thing about it is you generally don't think about putting it on. You just get in your car, you put it on, you go where you have to go, and when you get there, you know that that's something you got to do in order to exit the vehicle. And so I submit to you that I think that has become part of your culture for driving. That has become part of who you are. That means that you're not worried that the police might tell you to put it on. You're not worried that somebody might see you, but you definitely do it because that's just what you do. And when it comes to safety and health, I think a lot of culture is built around building in these rules. Now, some of them are written rules, some of them are unwritten, and they become our norms. But when we get to the point where everybody is doing what they're supposed to do, not because they're worried about being told, but because that's how we function here, that's the expectations, that's the level of expertise that we have, that's the level of rigor we expect. When we see those kinds of things, I believe that more clearly defines culture. but it's our values and our beliefs and our attitudes. It's all of that stuff rolled into one. It isn't just simply, this group has this culture and this group has a different one. Every organization has a culture of safety, every single one. The difference is some of them are less positive than others. So I like to say there's the less positive culture and then there's the more positive safety culture. It is measurable. You can measure it. You can define it. You can figure out where you are. But I will also tell you that it's a journey. Changing the culture of an organization takes time. I don't know the magic number. I read lots of books on culture. And so in reading those books, what I find is that some books say, well, 5 years is reasonable. Some say 7 years is reasonable. Don't know what the magic number is, but I can tell you that as when I was in the military as an officer, as a commander, that it would have been great if I could have just walked out in front of a group one day and just said, listen up, everyone. Effective immediately, we're going to have a good safety culture. That is all. Go back to work. I will tell you that I tried it a couple times, didn't get the best results out of that. So I think that there's more to it than just willing it into place, that we have to be deliberate and we have to then put actions in place that help us along the way. So when we try to improve that culture, we really have to say, what is our strategy for improving the culture? And you're never going to be able to put a good strategy in place unless you build a framework and say, these are the things that we're going to help utilize to bring that sustainable culture into place. We want a systematic approach. We want a system that challenges us, but that from every single element that we look at, we can say that it is supporting and improving our culture. And that means that we need to get leaders involved. We need to get leaders committed. We need to measure. We need to get employees engaged in a meaningful way. So all of those are ways that we can do that. I get asked by leaders sometimes, I know that I should be doing something, but I'm not sure what it is. And I came up with this list of 7 things. And on the 7 things that I share with them, I said, number 1, you need to have a vision and then communicate that vision to everyone else. And whatever that vision looks like, it doesn't have to be difficult, it doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to be complex. You can simply say, there's nothing we do here that's worth getting hurt. And if your vision is that simple, that's fine. But if you're going to say that, then back it up. Whatever you do should support that vision, but also communicate it. So don't make that vision your best kept secret. If that's going to be your vision, then live it each and every day. When we talk about safety and health, don't say, this is our business, this is what we do, these are all the metrics about our business, this is all the things that we're doing right, and oh, by the way, there's some safety stuff we have to do as well. That should be an integrated conversation. When we talk about things that improve the business, let's talk about things to improve safety and health at the same time. Within our organization, we should have defined roles and responsibilities, and that's easier said than done. But within those defined roles and responsibilities, there has to be some level of accountability from each and every person that's on your org chart, no matter where they sit on that chart. When it comes to safety and health, we have to define that, and we have to hold people accountable for that. So we have to require accountability from all employees, not just some. We also have to make sure that we allocate resources. Safety and health will not happen unless you plan for it. And part of our planning means that we may have to have some budget attributed to helping us with safety and health. It's okay to have a safety budget. It's okay to set money aside to say these are for our safety improvements, and do that right along with your other capital improvements and other things that you have coming up. And then we have to do assessments. Understand who we are and what do we bring to the table, and then use them as your framework to make your plan moving forward. It isn't as simple as saying, we hope nothing goes wrong, but you can't fix what you don't know is broken. Let's be clear about that. And then we have to take proactive measures. Historically, when we look at safety and health, it is incredibly reactive. And what I mean by that is we've all seen this, something bad happened, and clearly there needs to be an investigation. And we say, what can we do to make sure that doesn't happen again? That's normal. That is what every organization does. But isn't a better use of our time to say what could happen and what can we do to make sure that doesn't happen? And I think aviation is a leader. They're pioneers in figuring out what could happen, and we do that very well. But even in the aviation industry, I find that there's differences, and I'm talking about commercial aviation at this point. There's differences sometimes in where we are. If you're in the U.S., there is, sit down unless the seatbelt sign is off, and there's all of these, this is how you put your seatbelt on. I just passed 2 million miles. I think I figured out how to put the seatbelt on by now, but I get told that every single time I get on a plane. I'm okay with it. I get why they do that, but you know what? Let's just talk about my recent trip. So I went to Saudi Arabia, and then I had to leave Saudi Arabia and go to India. Well, plane took off from Dammam, and they were a little bit less than attentive to the instructions that were given to us, but nonetheless, we sat through, and they did it in Arabic, and they did it in Hindi, and they did it in English. I think it was English. I recognized some of the words. But then what was interesting is, that whole thing about don't put your tray tables down. The flight attendant kept walking down and said, "Sir, could you put your tray table down?" And he was like, "Why? It's my table. I want to use it." Or put it up rather, and so he wouldn't put it up. And then the most interesting thing I saw is when the plane landed, they always make that announcement, "Please remain seated until the plane comes to a complete stop." And so as soon as the wheels touched the ground, you know how you touch down and you bounce a little bit? There were people standing up, getting their bags down, walking down the aisle, and they were like, "Please sit down," and they were like, psh. They weren't paying any attention to that. And so I really thought about, wow, that's a big difference in culture, because I could see folks going to jail trying to do that in Canada or in the U.S. But over there, it was like, what, I told you don't want to do it, fine. And so that's the kind of thing that we see that identifies who we are. But it also says those differences gives us our opportunities for improvement. And clearly there's a lot. I think I hope nobody in here works for them or flies them regularly, but Saudi Airlines and Gulf Air are not my first two choices of international flights anymore as a result of what I've experienced there. I said that we have to have meaningful engagement for our employees, and meaningful means different things. But what I really mean by that is don't make people do stuff for the sake of doing it. If we want to have strong safety and health programs, then that meaningful engagement piece says, let's find a way to get people involved so that and to do that, we have to have visible commitment from the top. We have to make sure that we offer them development and capabilities. If you say, I want you to help us with safety inspections, that's fine. But don't do that until you teach them how to do that. If you say, I want you to help with incident investigations, that's fine, but don't have them do investigations until we give them the tools to be able to do that well. And then as we look at that individual engagement and influence, let's just recognize that everybody brings something to the table. And we have to have varied and constant communication to reinforce our most important things that we need in safety and health. And then the last one on here is let's recognize and reward and enforce and reinforce the good things that people are doing. It is by far very, very, very cheap to just walk up to somebody that's doing something right and say, good job. Thank you for doing that. That goes a long, long, long ways. And then make sure that if we do involve employees, we have appropriate tools. There was a Gallup poll, and the Gallup poll was a little disappointing, and I've seen the US version, I've seen a UK version, and what was disappointing at it is that true engagement is at a very, very, very low percentage. About 1/3 of folks are actively engaged. About 1/3 of folks, or a little bit less maybe, are actively not engaged to the point where they say, I'm not going to do it, and you can't make me. But then there's a whole middle group. More than half of folks are just not engaged. They don't do anything because we don't allow them to be engaged. So it isn't that they won't do it, it's just that they don't do it. I mean, they just don't have anything. We're not giving them, we're not challenging them. There are some barriers. Sometimes we ask employees to do things and they say, nope, don't want to. Well, some of those barriers come from simply don't trust you. Don't trust that you want me to do this for a good reason. Don't trust that there's anything good that can come out of this. Sometimes I'm afraid. There's a climate of fear. Sometimes there's a lack of demonstrated commitment in the organization from the top leadership. There's change. When we say we want the culture to change, we have to recognize that there is change involved and expected. And so with that change that has to happen, we have to allow time. And if we don't allow time, then that's not going to go well. Or to say that we want to change, but we don't have a plan. We just expect that it'll happen without taking the time to plan out what we want. Or failure to communicate what's happening. Everybody can see something's happening, but they don't know why, and they don't know exactly what's coming up next. And the thing about change is we tend to engage better. We tend to accept the change better if we have a little bit more control. You can figure out where your culture is. One of the things that we encourage at our organization, at the National Safety Council, is for you to take perception surveys to your employees. Give them to them. And find out what they're thinking. Perception is reality. And so if they're seeing that they feel like top leadership is not engaged, then so be it. But if the top leadership says we are engaged, then what's the breakdown? Maybe their communication isn't happening. Maybe it's something much simpler that we should explore. And then measuring what we do. Once upon a time, somebody told me what gets measured gets done. I absolutely 100% believe that, because when that number's out in front of you, when we're expected to engage, when we're expected to keep track of those numbers, then we have a tendency to do what it takes to get there. For those of you that are when I do my longer session this afternoon, I'll talk more about the use of leading and lagging indicators and how to balance those out, but certainly offer some recommendations for more leading indicators. But if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. That's the bottom line. If we don't know what we're looking at, there isn't anything that we can do to get better. We have to have, good data. We have to look at our activities. We have to make sure that we have a plan in place built around that data. So when the data has an indication that we're moving in the wrong direction, we can course change there, change the direction, and improve our performance accordingly. And so all of this, I like to call it the journey to safety excellence. I think that's what we want. We want our organizations to perform in an excellent way, but in order to get there, it is a journey. It doesn't simply just happen, and we have to measure our performance. We have to set goals. We have to implement our recommended changes through what we've identified through our gap analysis, and we have to take time to review to make sure that we're doing the right thing. But all the while, from a leadership standpoint, we have to maintain that commitment. So that journey is that cycle of reducing our risk and try to reach our goal of zero harm. That's what we want to do. The idea here is let's keep leadership engaged in a meaningful way. Let's keep employees engaged in a meaningful way. That helps support the culture. We have to have good safety management systems in place. We have to think about that whole process of risk reduction and performance measurement. And why it matters? Because from a worker standpoint, workers do better at earning a living in a place that isn't going to kill them. If I asked you all in this room, with the exception of a few of you, he got a payday because of what happened to his finger. But for the rest of you, if I said, what would make your job better? Many, many, many times I hear, pay me more money, and that'll make my job better. And as much as you'd like to say that and believe that, that isn't entirely true. There are many organizations that pay very, very, very well. But if their employees feel like at the end of the day, they're not going to be able to go home in the same condition they arrived, then the pay doesn't matter. I'll go somewhere else and take less money because I value being injury-free and alive more than the money. And that's the reality we have to take. So let me ask that question to the group. How many of you think that let me see how I can ask this. How many of you say that you want more money in your job? Anybody? Okay. Remember, I took your picture. I'm showing it to your bosses. All right. So I think that that's true, though, that many of us say that. And it's okay to say that. There's nothing wrong with saying it. I'm not saying don't say that. What I am saying is that that is not the only reason that we stay at a job or choose to leave. Money very, very rarely forces people to change occupations, but not feeling safe will force you to change and go to somewhere else. Not feeling safe will. And so I'll just kind of wrap this up and say, as we start drawing this out, as we think about management systems and how they support the safety and health program, just know that there's administrative and management portions and operational, technical, and culture and behavior forms that basis or that foundation of moving those management systems forward. And it doesn't matter if you make your own management system, if you use an FAA management system or the ISO or ANSI. It doesn't really matter whose system you use. Just know that you can't make that system work unless you have leadership and engagement and involvement, and we think more about that culture and the behavior. And the last thing that I'll say about this whole safety management thing is that there is evidence that injuries are reduced between 15 and 35%, which equates to a $9 to $23 billion savings just for doing safety and health right, just for having that management system in place. And that injuries and illness rates get lowered between 9 and 60%. Once again, just by doing it right. Okay. Thank you all very much. Okay, smile again.
I'll get you to stay up, Wes.
Okay, stay.
Thank you, Wes. I'll get you to take a perch at the end. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, as Wes takes his seat on the plenary, I'm going to get another few of our luminaries up because we wanted to talk about how to get the SMS, the culture, embedded in all areas. And we've heard from Wes a number of ways about how we need to consider what the message is and how we need to target that message, whether it's the humanity piece, whether it's the financial piece, or indeed the regulatory piece. But we also want to bring in some different thinking from different areas as well. So I'm going to invite up, first of all, Scott Shappell. Scott Shappell is going to make his way towards the podium. Many of you will know Scott. Scott and Doug Wiegman, his business partner, do a tremendous amount of work for the summit, and they'll be presenting a number of their workshops, which are always highly popular. He's a professor and chair of the Department of Human Factors and Systems down at Embry-Riddle. He has a tremendous background both in psychology, in aviation. He's a pilot, he's a doctor, he's a professor. He's just an all-round good guy, and he's quite funny at times as well. So he was the perfect guy to stand up here and facilitate this particular segment of the summit. He's well published as well, got a lot of good stuff through the HFAX company that he and Doug run, and we've been running pre-summit courses as well with putting about 30-odd people through the training to understand the human factors side as well. So Scott is going to join us now. He's going to facilitate it. Also up on the stage as well, we have Professor Guy André-Boy. And Guy has an interest and passion for the emergence of new practices in the use of current technology. And I'll get into the description of some of the stuff that he does. His personal research agenda is directed by the search of artifacts' properties, artifacts being direct, concrete representations of human intelligence, which can be physical tools or objects, as well as abstract concepts. He's so clever, I don't even understand the simplified description of what he does, okay? That says two things. One, his work is leading edge, and he's got a couple of workshops later on in the summit that will take you through some mind-blowing research that they're doing about how to feed fused data into the cockpit of fixed wing, and hopefully one day rotary craft, how they get that fused information to the pilots to allow them to make decisions based on real-time information. So there's some fascinating stuff to come from Guy during his workshops, but he's also going to join us very kindly as one of the plenary sessions. Guy also has a lot of experience, not only in aviation, where he's done a lot of work through the university, through the École Polytechnique, which is one of the leading-edge scientific-based organizations in France, over in Paris. He's the chief scientist for the human-centered design for NASA. Again, doctor, professor, safety guy. So I'm going to put Guy up here, and he can talk with. Yeah. You can only sit next to Wesley if you're not a touchy-feely kind of guy, because I don't want anything to kick off after Wes's remarks earlier on. Okay, the third panelist for sitting up here under Scott's facilitation is Professor and Dr. Graham Braithwaite. Where is Graham? Here he comes. Don't run, because you'll fall over and then you'll become a statistic. So he's coming in an orderly fashion. Graham is the head of transport systems at Cranfield University, one of the world's leading organizations. He joined Cranfield as a senior lecturer and director of the Safety and Accident Investigation Center back in 2003. He became the acting head of transport in May 2006 and then took over full-time later on. And since 2014, he's been head of the Transport Systems Theme, which is made up of the Center for Air Transport Management, the Safety and Accident Investigation Center, the Center for Automotive Engineering, and the Center for Automotive Technology and National Flying Laboratory Center. He's also the Director of Education for the School of Aerospace, Transport and Manufacturing, one of the 4 schools that makes up Cranfield University. Huge background in aviation, huge background in accident investigation, lots of experience in other areas such as rail safety as well across the globe. So between these 3 and the steady hand of Scott Shappell, we're in for about an hour of interactive questions and answers, looking at the exam question that was posed for the start of the summit. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Scott.
Thank you. Well, we're ready to get started. By the way, thank you very much for the opening address. That was wonderful. Usually I fall asleep about halfway through. It didn't happen, so that was good. And that's always a positive sign, right? I didn't see a bunch of heads going down, and which is always a good thing. What I want to do is open up, because I think that with this idea of safety management systems, or SMS, I don't know about you guys, but I always get nervous whenever we put an acronym to anything. And we've had so many 3-letter acronym programs in our industry, in aviation and in other industries. I'm wondering to myself, what is going to make, and in your opinions, what is going to make SMS any different than, oh, I don't know, we can start talking about, what was it, some TQL I think we did about 10, 15 years ago, and we introduced to everybody. We thought total quality leadership, that was going to be the end all. And then now I guess about 5 or 6 years ago, we started talking about Six Sigma and how that's a wonderful program. And we're seeing all these different programs we've done. We've been down this crew resource management road. We've done all these acronyms. What makes SMS any different? And I'm not sure who wants to begin with that, but I'd like to hear your opinion. Yes, sir.
You know, I think that's a fair question, and the one good thing about a safety management system is it's not as prescriptive as, say, TQL or even Six Sigma as we would expect. Now, I know that if you get forced a system and they say, hey, follow this one, and you have to do these steps exactly this way, that's clearly not going to work. There has to be enough variability in order to make it adapt to what I do. And I think that's the important thing is, and so what I would say about safety management systems is there's definitely a lot of evidence that having a system in place works, but it's not as simple as a program that there is a start and end. And don't think of the pieces of that beyond anything other than this is my pathway to continuous improvement. And so the difference between this and those acronym-based systems and programs is, you know, those have a start and stop and a pathway that you must go. With this, it is figure out where you are, do what it takes at that level to get you to the next level, and then start over again. And that's really how safety management systems are designed to work if they're implemented properly. Now, I know that several years ago I did some work with a number of companies that were looking specifically at the FAA's guidelines on safety management systems, and I struggled with that one a little bit because I thought they were a little bit too rigid and did not allow the variability in there. And so my recommendation is use that as a basis and then figure out what you really need and do that. But anyway, that's kind of my thoughts is think of it as an a la carte system versus start and stop somewhere.
Guy, do you?
Yes. So I think it's a matter of culture and meaning. So first, culture. Culture is to people what water is to fish. So you have to be very well integrated in the culture. So how a culture is made? It's actually a very complex thing. So it's an emergent phenomenon. So it emerges from atomic rules, from activities of people. So in fact, we have to find these rules, and we have to adapt them to adjust the right culture. That's this is very difficult, but this is doable. So that's the thing. And this morning, I was really listening with a lot of attention the first talk on inclusion, engagement, and accountability. But there will not be any inclusion, engagement, and accountability if there is no meaning, if the people don't understand where they go. So in fact, this is very important to know the appropriate level of knowledge that each individual in the company or in the institution will have to know. So this is extremely important. So in fact, to summarize, I think is culture and culture as an emergent phenomenon, and meaning what is the right level of knowledge that we have to adapt at various levels of the organization.
Graham, I know you teach this stuff, so.
Yeah, look, I think there was a time before SMS when there were certain companies doing something that we might now recognize as SMS, and it just wasn't called that. Of course, now we talk about SMS, there are some companies doing things that they call SMS that still aren't SMS, because they haven't really understood what it's all about. And there'll become a time in the future where no doubt keynote speakers will prance up and down the stage criticizing their colleagues because SMS has become old and now there's something new. They'll add a letter to it, it'll become ISMS or ESMS or NSMS or whatever it is. And I think that's just part of the evolution of it. It's added another layer of seriousness, added another layer of credibility. It's made us speak about safety with more than just enthusiasm. It's made us speak about safety in terms that the rest of the management of the business can understand, and that's a really good thing. But I think it's just another stage of evolution, so naturally there'll be something else to come. And this is part of keeping it high on the agenda. You've got to, as we've just heard, you've got to change the message now and then. So if in 10 years' time we're all talking about SMS in the same way, then everybody will be completely bored with it, and we lose the excitement that should come with initiatives like this. So I think it's part of the journey.
What are your thoughts? To me, I find it interesting that any time, at least in the United States, when the federal government gets involved and mandates something, they seem to muck up the works. Or they'll mandate something, they'll say, you're going to do this, but they won't give you any description on how to do it. You're just going to do it. And so what do you think we would have been better off? And I don't know how many countries around the world mandate this sort of thing, but certainly we do in the U.S. We insist upon it. What do you do with that, gentlemen? How do you see that going forward? Is that going to just make it worse? Or is it going to become now a government program that with all of its trappings that become just an albatross that sinks it? Or are we better off left to our own devices to do with it what we will?
I think SMS is made up of so many components that certain of the components, if you get it right, will deal with that the problem that comes from just complying with whatever the grown-ups say we should do in safety management. So if you've got the safety culture bit right, then the chances are then that's going to make you want to exceed at all times whatever it is that's set there as a minimum regulatory standard. But of course, one of the reasons to go for a regulatory standard is that, well, how do we know you're doing a good enough job unless we've got some standard to measure it against? And if people start to see SMS in it as a way of just demonstrating compliance, then we've lost the bit that made it different from whatever we were doing before.
Right, I tend to agree. Gentlemen?
One of the things that I think about the compliance piece is, I think for most of organized countries, there was a time when safety and health was left to the devices of the owners of the company and whatever made sense. Eventually that changed a bit, and it we started looking for more direction. How do I do better? We now have, in most organized countries, Western countries, we have some kind of standard that says this is what you need to do for compliance. It's difficult to put management systems and to mandate compliance for management systems, although there has been some efforts to do that. In the state of California in the US, they have injury and illness prevention programs that are very much set up as a framework of a four-part safety management system, and then they're trying to federalize that, although there's a lot of pushback. And the reason there's a lot of pushback is because it's difficult to walk into an organization and then say you're doing it right or you're not, because it's not easily quantifiable. You can qualify whether you're doing things. It's much hard to quantify it from that standpoint. Doesn't make it impossible, but I think that, you know, the whole idea of will it become, you know, an effort that is going to be across the board, you know, mandated compliance-wise for everybody. There are definitely efforts out there to do that. I don't think that's the right approach, because every organization finds that there is something different that they have to do. And, you know, I have to agree with my colleague that, you know, I see that safety management systems were done by folks long before. We called it safety management systems, and you know, but I also think that we'll be looking for something new in the future. Compliance is probably not the way to go with this one.
Yeah, in fact, I think we have to think in terms of technology, organization, and people. Technology is evolving all the time, and we have to take that into account. So, for instance, you know, it's interesting because I give a class at Florida Institute of Technology on life critical systems. And someone asked me, why do you call it life critical system? It's about safety. Why don't you call it safety critical systems? And in fact, I will tell you a story. In fact, anytime, you know, when I go to work in the morning, I have a ritual. Maybe it's because I'm getting older. I take my jacket and I put it on the back seat. And while I'm doing this, I put the phone on the roof of the car. And then I take the phone and put it on the slot. And then I drive and I go to either to NASA or FIT. That morning, I forgot my phone on the roof of the car. And then when I started accelerating on the A1A, it's a boulevard there, I heard a noise and I saw my iPhone in the mirror, and in the back, of course. And then I had lots of thoughts. And one of the persistent one was, I hope the car behind me will crash it. So you know, I suddenly realized, not instead of safety, but security there. And in fact, there was a lot of things on my phone. And I didn't realize, I mean, I realized, of course, but that was not incorporated, that was not embodied as a matter of fact. And this kind of thing was not at all a problem 15 years ago. And now it's life critical. When you lose it, you realize this is life critical. So we are creating new things all the time. And this is accelerating right now. So in fact, technology cannot be taken out of the safety management system. I think it's very important to understand. I go back to the complexity things. We have to understand these emergent properties that this new technology is providing us with. So that's could I continue on this?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so technology, organization, and people. So the technology side has to be understood all the time. You know, it's a constant investigation. Second is organization. When we design technology, most of the time we think about more and more now about human factors. I mean, after many years of crusades, if I could say, or preaching, you know, now it's there. So in fact, we are taking into account people. People meaning, their capabilities in terms of situation awareness, decision making. I don't want to enter into details. But also, when we design new technology, sometimes we don't realize that we implicitly create new jobs. We think about, but sometimes we don't realize totally what this new job is. Let me take an example. For instance, I was in France during the beginning of the 80s and during the 80s. And I was working at ONERA, the French Aerospace Research Administration, and I was seconded to the flight test at Airbus. And we were working on the glass cockpit. And then it took us some time to realize the new job we were creating there. In fact, we were going from control to management, from controlling the airplane only, to controlling the airplane again, but also managing systems. And the role of the manager is not the role of the guy under. So in fact, the problem is when you get a promotion in an organization, then you have to supervise, you have to manage other people. Some people do the job you were doing before. So in fact, sometimes you micromanage, and this is not good. And I saw that many times, pilots using the FMS and micromanaging the FMS and turning off, say, okay, I don't know what if I'm at the waypoint right now, so in fact, we have to understand what are these emergent properties, and in terms of, in this case of people, in terms of new jobs or new role, let's take it more generally. The organization, I said, now we are taking into account more and more human factors, design time. As a matter of fact, we are calling this human-centered design. But there is another thing that we don't take into account most of the time, is the organization that goes with the technology and people. In fact, when you design a new machine, then, or a new system, or a new concept, whatever, then there are people interacting. And it's not only for one person. And even if it's for one person, what will this person do in the community, So that's the kind of thing that we have to take into account. I don't want to talk too much, so I will come back on that.
Well, I just wanted to add a comment to your first one about your cell phone. I've always looked at things glass half full because you got a new iPhone. So that's a good deal, right? Whenever I need a new iPhone, I just drop my old one. Otherwise, my wife won't let me replace it. So, yeah. But that's all a secret here. Wes, I do have a question for you, though, because I was actually very intrigued by your presentation, particularly the part about the $500 and how I never really thought about it like that. It's been I have in the past, many years ago, when a friend of mine, Peter Gardner, was up here giving a talk about a business case for safety. And he used to talk very similar messages where you don't really think about how much, $500 is a drop in a bucket to a big company. But when you put it in perspective how long it takes to earn that, to get that profit, now it starts to take on a new life. And there was a question from the audience, and along those lines, it basically said, from your perspective, how do we convey the message on the bottom line impact of safety to the silent majority? Can you share a success story or even a failure story? And I think that's a really relevant thing. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Sure. And that's actually a great question. And so I think that any conversation around money is it's a great one for leaders to have because it makes sense to them. It's relevant to what we're doing and why we're doing it. And for most leaders, that's the right question. But, that silent majority tends to be the folks that I come to work and do my job, go home. And so what does that really mean to me? I really think that would never be a conversation I would have with that group, to be honest. I'm a firm believer, and I don't want to oversimplify this thing, but I think at the end of the day, every person, every adult, no matter what we're doing, including sitting in this room at this moment, is asking or has asked himself the question, what's in it for me? And so when we talk about that, what's in it for me, you go back to, that dollars doesn't matter. It matters to the organization. And even if you wanted to say it in passing and just to say, just so you know, just to get an idea of what your colleagues or you getting hurt cost the company, you can throw it out there as anecdotal information, but I think that expecting that silent majority or that cross-section of folks to change what they're doing based on that conversation alone would be fruitless. But a better conversation is, this is what you get out of doing the things that we're asking you to do to be safe. And I think that would be a better approach for them.
I saw an example a few years ago. This was from Air New Zealand, who were trying to get out to people just how much they lost in ground damage. So the damage they did to their own aircraft during a turnaround and so on. And the head of safety did a calculation about how much it cost in terms of secondary costs, tertiary costs, and so on, and then came up with how many tickets they now needed to sell to then pay back the cost of the damage to their own aeroplanes. And when he eventually put it in really simple terms, which was the 747 which leaves from Auckland to London will now fly for the next 22 days solely to pay off the damage we did to our own aeroplanes, then people were able to relate to that. They were able to get it. Now, it's just a clever way of portraying the numbers, but if you think that you come to work for the next month pretty much and every single seat on that aeroplane leaving for London is just to pay to the stuff that we do to our own selves, then that really captured people's imagination.
See, I think that, to me, is a much different approach than what we've typically seen. I go into, and you've all done this, you've went into different workplaces, and you see these posters up. We have this zero harm, zero accident rate goal, and goals are great. I understand the purpose. You can't go out and say, we want a 10% accident rate, because that doesn't sound good. So you go out there and your goal is obviously no harm, nobody gets hurt, zero accident rate. I understand that. But after a while, you just get numb to it. It's meaningless because all of us in this room know that we're never going to get to a zero accident rate in commercial aviation. There will always be accidents, that's what they are. But I think when you put it in tangible meaning, now you've changed the whole dynamic. When you start to put posters up saying exactly that, an accident, even a minor accident that costs $1,000 is going to take us X amount of days to recover from in profit, and the profit margin is so thin. I don't know what your thoughts are, but I think sometimes it's the messaging that we give to the masses. And the messaging right now is a feel-good message. Let's go out and be safe. And we have these silly cartoon posters that everybody ignores. And in fact, I would challenge people right now to tell me exactly what's on those cartoon posters in your maintenance bay. Can you remember? Do you really know? I mean, you all know what your slogans are, but do you really know what's on that messaging? And so I wonder what your thoughts are on messaging for SMS. I understand that you don't necessarily want to go forward with the business case to everybody in the field, but there has to be a way to get this out to where people embrace it and don't just think of it as another three-letter program that we're going to all have to do. Any takers?
Yeah, I think it's important to convey the message that the zero risk doesn't exist. But we have also to say that fatal accidents decreased exponentially during the last 3 decades. So it's really important. So in fact, it's really tending to zero. But it will never be zero. So the problem is the nature of the accident changed. And this is what is scary people. Because sometimes we don't understand in terms of the past accidents. So it's a new thing, And so that's why it's a big issue. But in fact, altogether, we are increasing safety, especially in aviation. So I think this is very important to articulate these kind of things. And there is also something that I want to say because I've been discussing this with my colleagues, human factors colleagues, for quite a while. We have been working on human errors for a long time, for 3 decades. And we have made classifications of errors and we have made things. But the problem is we very, very barely worked or not worked on human engagement. So human error is the negative aspect, but human engagement is the positive aspect of people. In fact, by working on human error, sometimes one of the consequences is that either we automate more or we develop more procedures. But what are procedures? Procedures are automation of people. So in fact, the criticism that we make on automation, you can do it on procedures as well. Except that procedure, you can stop them more easily if you want. But the problem is, from this approach of human error only, I'm not, I worked on that also, I think it's limiting. I think we need to work more on human involvement, human engagement. And for that matter, we need to better understand the kind of function allocation between human and systems we have to do at design time. And design time is every day, in fact, because we are redesigning all the time. But the first cut, I think, is very important. So in fact, we have to put human factors into design as early as possible.
Oh, I definitely agree with that. Other comments?
I think that the messaging piece doesn't have to be complex or overly difficult. And the reason why I say that, if you think about, if we go back to safety management systems and say, what is it that we really need or would like to communicate? I mentioned earlier about we need to have a vision. It doesn't have to be complex or complicated, but I think that we have to be consistent in sharing that vision and consistent in sharing what we expect our mission to be, particularly incorporating safety and health. We're going to get to where we need to go on time, and we're going to get there safely, and all of our passengers are going to get there safely, or whatever makes sense. And then there's that whole goal-setting piece, and I do believe that we should share our goals. But part of sharing the goals is not only saying where we want to get to, but updating us routinely as a report card of how we're doing to meet those. And there are those that are proponents for Six Sigma and Lean, and then there are those that say, it's just a bunch of extra work. But the one thing that you can't take away from that is, when Eli Toyota went to Ford in the 1950s and said, show me what you're doing, and then went back to Japan and tried to redo and reinvent that model, what's come out of that is lots of scorecard processes and lots of ways to keep up with what we're doing and to use that to reinforce and continue sharing the message. I think what's important to note is that not everybody gets every message. Not everybody reads every bulletin board. Not everybody reads every poster with or without cartoon characters. Not everybody reads every newsletter. And not everybody reads an email updating us. We just can't put all of our eggs in a single basket and say we're going to reach everybody that way. One of the mistakes I made in my career, I worked in a medical laboratory, and part of my responsibilities was the safety department reported to me, and quality and some other areas. And I thought that I need to get more information about safety out, and I thought, I'm going to do a newsletter. That's what I'm going to do. So I sat down and wrote up this really, really nice newsletter and thought that the best way to get it to the 1,500 folks that worked in this lab was staple the newsletter to their paychecks. It was very clear to me right away that what was important to them was the paycheck and not the newsletter, because there were 1,500 newsletters in the trash, but a whole bunch of people spending money over the next couple of weeks. So I said, well, maybe because it was the wrong color, then maybe they just didn't notice it was a newsletter. Let's print it on colored paper and try it again. We did that, but of course, when I went to the print shop, they were out of every color except for pink. Uh-oh. And they attached that to the paychecks. That just served to just tick people off. They didn't get that. And then my daughter said something to me, and one of my twins says, well, Dad, when I'm at school and they want us to know stuff at school, they put it on the back of the stalls in the bathroom. And so maybe that's what you should do. And I said, you know, I want to do that. And so I put plexiglass holders, and I put critical information on the back of the stalls in the loo, in the restrooms. And believe it or not, people will come up to me and says, wow, great newsletter. Thanks for putting that out. And of course, they'd reach out to shake my hand. And I was like, no, thank you. I don't want to shake your hand, but I appreciate the feedback. But what I did learn through that you know what, you got to be innovative in your messaging, and you have to say not one size fits all, and to find different ways to reinforce the message in different places and at different times. You know, whatever you think are the important pieces of that message. So,
Graham, go.
Scott, it's a great question. My answer is about 90 minutes long, and it's in a session this afternoon, so I should mention that. I'm so on message that I got a session about this. But I was thinking about this whilst I was preparing that session, and I was out driving my Toyota over some guy's iPhone, and it made me realize that SMS has become quite an industry in its own sense, and there's a lot of people employed in SMS, and it's just grown. And the danger is this is going to grow into some giant mothership that undocks itself from reality, and that the people who are not at a conference like this don't even know this kind of conference exists, not even interested in it. They're the people that we're worried about. And how do you get them enthused about it? And they've got to relate to it. So they've got to feel part of that thing. And you call it a management system. Some of us choose not to be part of a management system. That's what the grown-ups do. They just want to do safety properly when they come to work. And I do worry that in professionalizing safety, we perhaps lose out on some of that enthusiasm that used to be the thing that kept us safe. You know, the enthusiasts who were there because they genuinely cared about safety and they wanted to spread the message of that. Those people still exist, but let's not replace them with a system that's just about the numbers or just about the data. There's still got to be that enthusiasm at grassroots level. And there's lots of good examples out there where it's people over toolbox talks or actually on the line that are making this thing happen, and we shouldn't forget that. I can think of one example where I saw this in action. This was quite some years ago with an airline that had decided to offer human factors training to its ground handling staff, which was a very radical thing. And in the room, there were two of us observing. One was a captain for that airline, and he rarely interacted with these guys. These were the guys down there in the cold and wet that he used to pass the information with a stick out of his open window to or talk to on a set of headphones. And we got on to talking about loading aircraft and aircraft taking off with a center of gravity imbalance. And as he's telling the story, he said, well, you know, think about it. If I'm about to rotate and I hear a thud down the back of the airplane, that's really going to spoil my day. At which point one of these ground handlers said a clean version of, well, what do I care if I spoil your day, the amount of money you're on? And he said, oh, well, the reason you care is because I might screw up at this point. He said, I have a split second to work out what just went wrong here and deal with it. And if I get that wrong and I trash this airplane, what part did you just play? And there was a little bit of a realization in the room as people started to go, okay, yeah, you know, I can start to see that. And what was happening almost by accident was that there was a conversation starting to take place between two bits of a company that never otherwise happened. And it's small things like that that sometimes set the most exciting fires burning in terms of changing the culture.
Yeah, you know, I'm looking at some of the questions, and they're coming in fast and furious, and so we're not going to obviously be able to get to all of them. But there was one that keeps coming up every conference I go to, and I've heard it time and again, and it involves noncompliance. And we're all kind of dealing with this, and how do you deal with violations and things like that? And I guess I'm going to just give you a straight-up question. How do you recommend management enforce policies and address noncompliance without negatively affecting culture and ultimately the safety management system? How does that fit in to a good, solid SMS program? How do you deal with noncompliance? Yeah, go ahead.
I think we need to better emphasize the distinction between procedure following and problem solving. On one side, in aviation, procedures are key. Okay, we all agree this is very important. But in some cases, airmanship is very important. And so we did a study, I remember it's back in the mid-90s. In fact, there was 95 to 98 in France. A study done by, with the DGSE, is the French FAA, where we studied how people were using checklists and procedures, and we tried to better understand when they didn't use them. So 245 pilots, everything is available publicly. I mean, we had 3 big reports. So, we found out that, just one thing I want to say. When the pilot doesn't understand one item in a checklist or in a procedure, 65% of these 245 didn't use it. But they did better, in fact. And in fact, the problem is context. So sometimes the context changes, and in fact, it doesn't make sense sometimes to do something. So I don't want to, to say, okay, so we don't have to use the procedures. But sometimes problem solving is important. So if we are not prepared to do that, then it could be a big issue. So in fact, we have to articulate procedure following and problem solving. And this is about rigidity and flexibility. On one side, when you follow procedure, this is a rigid process. But most of the time, when you have a problem, a failure, a human error, you come very close to a weather that you didn't anticipate. And so you have lots of possibilities that requires good problem solving. So I think this is part of this is my answer to the question.
But you're not necessarily advocating not having procedures.
No.
Or having, I mean, there are times, but
Absolutely.
you're saying flexibility
Sure.
in those. Wes or Graham? Yeah.
The thing about this one, and I don't want to oversimplify it and don't want to upset anybody, but, I think we spend a lot of time on how do we deal with folks that don't want to do the right thing. The first thing is let's figure out why, and sometimes there really are legitimate reasons why. I once ran into a guy and he wasn't wearing safety glasses in an environment that it was clear that he should have been wearing them. And what it turned out when we really did some digging, it was because the environment was very humid. So asking him why, he says, I can't see, my glasses keep fogging up. So we found a solution for that and solved that problem. Sometimes there really are reasons and we just need to find out why. But I got asked this question some time ago, and I really thought hard about it, and I gave an answer, and I felt bad about my answer, and then I thought about it again. I said, nope, I stand by it. And my response at that time was, if we don't address some of the non-compliance things, that is giving them license to be repeated not only by that person, but by others, and we have to recognize that. And so, I had this conversation with some folks that worked with me before, and they didn't want to do something I needed them to do. It was, so in other words, they were out of compliance. And I said, look, when we hired you for this job, we agreed to pay you X dollars for your salary in order to perform the job. Now, as part of that job, if I'm asking you to do things to keep yourself and others safe, then that's included in there. But if I'm not asking you to do anything illegal, immoral, or unethical, then you do it and you go home with your check. But if we get to a crossroads where you say, you know what, I just can't or won't follow your rules, that I just do not support them, then now is the time to say that let's part as friends. You can dislike me if you want to, but find somebody else who's willing to pay you to not be in compliance. But I have this bigger picture here. I really care about what happens to you. I care about sending you home in one piece. I care about the folks that you work with, and I don't want anything that you're doing to affect them in a negative way. And that sometimes is the message that leaders aren't willing to share and say, if you don't want to do it, you gotta go. But, the other side of it is that a negative thing? I don't think so. I don't think it is, because there's a clear message there in that, one, we set expectations, we expect them to be met. But the bigger picture is we're isolating that potential issue from other employees. And sometimes I feel bad when I say that, because it sounds like I just want to go out and fire people, but that's not it. Normally, when you have that conversation with folks, they have a dose of reality, and suddenly everything is better. But I don't think we should ever tap dance around an issue that could hurt other people. It's bigger than that person not doing what they're supposed to do. So anyway.
Guy, and then I'll get with Graham. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think compliance is fundamental. This is important. What I was raising, the question I was trying to put on the table is actually when the procedure and the rules do not work in some context. So this was my point. But I totally agree with the compliance, of course. The problem is now, there was 2 or 3 years ago, the Air and Space Academy, I belong to this noble organization also, organized a conference on the unexpected. How do you deal with unexpected events? Unexpected could be a lot of things. There are events that are unexpected that could be anticipated because you know them, but you're not aware enough at that time. Or they are just events that you never saw before. So that's very rare. So at the moment in my institute, we are working on a system that we call onboard context-sensitive information system. It's an electronic library system on board commercial aircraft. And we try to better understand how to index the information, to present the information in context meaning in the situation.
Right.
And believe me, this is extremely difficult. This is very difficult. Up to now, the information is presented in, for instance, if you take the flight crew operation manual on Airbus, this is presented by ATA numbers. Okay, so if you want something on flight control, it's ATA 27, and then you follow the pages. The thing is, it would be good to have information on board that is indexed according to the actual, the current situation. And this is extremely complex and difficult to do. So by doing this, I want to illustrate the fact that procedure and checklist are indexed, are contextualized, if you want, generically, but in the real world, sometimes they don't work. That's the thing. So, and sometimes we don't realize this, but this is the starting point of a chain of events that could lead to an incident. So that's the kind of thing, and this is why problem solving and flexibility, that means competence and skills, are required to understand that.
Graham, you?
Yeah, I think I've got a relatively simple answer, which is that I think you do this very, very, very carefully, blighted with hindsight and all the other biases that come to you. And as a manager, you have a really, really tough job to try and figure out what is the effect of the decision that I'm about to make in dealing with this non-compliance. And I would guess if we did a straw poll of people in this room, everybody knows quite clearly what it is that they should do in the theoretical case when it comes to non-compliance. And then the one they have to deal with isn't quite like that. The circumstances are just a little bit grayer than they should be, or you know that if you respond to it in that particular way at that particular time because of this awkward thing you're dealing with, it's never that simple. So I think one thing I'd reassure people here that if you think it's a difficult thing to get it right, yep, most of the people who get it right think it's a difficult thing to get it right. And the people who think it's an easy thing to get right are the ones that often get it wrong and damage the culture in such a way that that's going to take quite some time to recover. So, go ahead. The great idea is to get the line, draw it in exactly the right place, only you've got to be right all of the time. And just looking across some of the presentations that are lined up for the next few days, we've got lots of bits that can help people with that. I know there are several discussions talking about just culture, for example, and there's a session also in there about biases and so on. So I just think it's one of those things we have to keep working at, knowing it's not an easy task.
Yeah. And I know we're coming towards the end, but there's a couple really good questions in here I want to make sure we get to the panel to discuss. Can you guys speak to the quality and safety manager who is experiencing a lack of upper management support for the initiative beyond regulatory requirements? So how do you deal with the lack of support? And there's lip service to the requirement, but then it's kind of like the unfunded mandate. We're going to do this. get it done, meet the letter of the law, but not necessarily the spirit of the law. And oh, by the way, you're not going to get any additional assets, so have a nice day. Now what do you do? Which is pretty typical of safety when you think about it. Safety is one of those things that we don't invest a lot of money into because there's no tangible, although Wes, I think you've made a very good case for there is a payback, actually a very substantial one. But it's hard to get that message across in this world of productivity. So how do you get the upper management to engage beyond just the regulatory requirement?
Yeah, that one is an ongoing challenge. And so I have just a couple of things I would say to that. You know, I sometimes run the risk of saying things that sound overly simplistic, but sometimes they're just that simple. And one of them is the realization, if I were to, you know, do a cross-section of the room here and say, what's your educational background? You know, if I said, how many of you took engineering courses, I'd see hands up, and chemistry courses, maybe some hands up, and business management courses and some hands up, and so there's all of these things. And so we were taking these courses and equipping ourselves to be able to serve in a position of leadership at some point. You know, we have, you know, pilots and maintenance folks, and we have all different sorts of folks that are represented here with a lot of different backgrounds. But the one thing that is probably true for many of us is back in the time when we were grooming for the roles that we're in now, and our leaders as well, nobody ever told them that this whole safety and health thing was important. And so that's why, you know, we know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. And that means that, you know, for safety folks and others that are educated in this process, it's good to bring them that message. But then it is, how do we get them to receive that message in a positive way and to do something with it? And it kind of goes back to something I talked about earlier, which is know who you're talking to and what motivates them, and tailor your conversation to that point so that when you have the conversation, they're now seeing some relevance. It's like, all right, I get it. Because if you just say, we need to do safety stuff because there's some rules out there we have to comply with, and they say, you know what, I'm not really care about the rules. Or if you say we got to do this safety stuff because we want to send people home in one piece, you know, the response might be, well, we don't hurt that many people. What's the big deal? But if you say, you know, your report card at the end of the day is how much did we produce and how much did we make and what's our return on our investment, and let's do this real-time cost analysis of our business, and we can roll this into there and I can show you tangible data. If that's how they make their decisions, then that's how we convince them to get on board. Figure out what it is that motivates them. And it doesn't stop there. It could be, you know, I don't want to be in the newspaper like Exxon or BP or others. I don't want to be the center of attention. If that's it, then maybe the conversation we need to have is, hey, if we do this safety stuff right, 60 Minutes won't be looking to interview you. And maybe that's the conversation. And sometimes there's union issues. And maybe if we do the safety thing right, some of those union issues that we are experiencing go away. But whatever it is that motivates them, that they find important, that says, you know what, this is how I define my role and how I define success in my role, then speak to how safety supports that. And you'll find that that conversation will help a lot. You know, it will make a big difference if you adjust your approach a little bit. So anyway, sorry.
Others? Other comments?
Yep.
I agree with Wes. I think it's important that you speak in a language that the board can relate to and so on. But I think also sometimes it's good to get someone else to deliver the message to support you. On occasion, that means bringing somebody in who's going to deliver it. And it doesn't have to be an expensive consultant or a university professor or anything like that. It can be somebody from the line, or it can be somebody affected by getting it wrong. I know some of us who were here a few years ago got to listen to Bill Charles talk, and Bill Charles talking from the personal experience of having to deliver bad news to family members of people within his company who died in an accident. And it was clear from the way he spoke that he developed a very personal and long-lasting commitment on the basis of that. I know that through some of the work we do at the university, we're privileged enough to work with an organisation called Disaster Action, and they're a group of family members who've been affected by accidents. They're not mad, they're not raving, they don't turn up and scream that the only thing that you should do is be safe or stop operating. Actually, they're normal people. But when they sit down and talk to you about the effect that getting it wrong has on them, then we've witnessed even some of the toughest of military guys sat in our classes with a tear in their eye, or at least write the feedback to say, that's made me think about safety in a very different way for having had that experience. So you can't use the shock tactic the whole time, but on occasion, if people can talk to someone and understand how real it is when you get it wrong, then I think that has a benefit as well.
I think it's interesting you mentioned that. I remember a conference in Queensland, Australia. I went to a mining conference and spoke there. And they had people that were the survivors of relatives that were killed in mining disasters. And if you can see the impact beyond just the individual family even, I mean, it is a long impact. The line is long whenever we lose anybody or anybody's hurt or maimed in serious ways. And it's not just until that person recovers. There sometimes is never any recovery. And it's devastating. I think, unfortunately, we put everything intangible. We make it all numbers in our world. I mean, I look at accidents every day, and I look at the numbers of fatalities, and those numbers really don't have meaning. They don't have faces. It's just numbers. And as a statistician, you find yourself at times, and you probably have too, Graham, we're all scientists here, where you're like, man, I need more numbers. And then you step back and you say, the numbers I'm asking for are dead people. And you pinch yourself and think, what is wrong with me? But yet you're still there. I have another quick question for you all, and this one is something that's along those lines, but our safety programs are focused mainly on our frontline people. So when we put safety programs out there, it's about people at the pointy end of the spear. How do we reach the rest of the organization? It seems to me that sometimes, how many times have we seen management come in? They do the helicopter in, which is kind of ironic here, but they helicopter in, they do their speech, and they're gone. And more often than not, sometimes they're not wearing their PPE, or they're wearing PPE that's so clean and never been used because these guys never wear it, or they're not necessarily adhering to the message. And yet, it always gets out to us on the front lines. Go ahead.
I'll try to answer this question, but follow up on the other one. In fact, I was thinking when you were talking before about two things. First is articulation work. There are people in organization that know how to articulate the work in order to get a good product. They are not necessarily managers. They could be secretaries, they could be anybody, and when you lose them, you realize that you lost a lot. So in fact, this articulation work, or it's called sometimes invisible work, and it's not rewarded most of the time. So this is very important to reward that. And this is very important to install this kind of thing. If you want engagement, then this is absolutely necessary. Articulation work is very important. A second thing is the trust and credibility in information. So if I refer to the Challenger accident, 1986, NASA knew for 4 years, 1982, since 1982, they knew about the O-rings problems, the fragility of that with low temperature, and etc. So they had a group working on it, a task force, if you want. But in fact, the problem is when you are about to push the button and say, take off, then you have lots of people around you. I've been there. I mean, not for this one, but I've been in other ones. And you have lots of information. The question is not necessarily the question of the truth of information. The problem is the credibility in what you are presented with. So in fact, the people come and say some people are optimists, some other people are pessimists, and then you have to make a synthesis of all this and say, okay, now we will launch. This is extremely difficult. So in fact, this should be better understood for safety. I mean, and there are people who are better than others to do that. I mean, I've seen very, very good people, at synthesizing micro decisions, mini decisions if you want, and making a big decision. You know, that's articulation work and credibility in the information.
Wes and Graham?
I think are you speaking of the last question you asked about how do you get that focus to the rest of folks?
Yeah, how do you get to the rest of the organization?
The problem that we have in some organizations is that everybody doesn't recognize their roles. And I think we have to be clear about that. And I hate to always use stories, but when I was in the military, I started as an enlisted person and then worked my way through that and then agreed to go to OCS, to Officer Candidate School, and become an officer. And in my first command as an officer, I was really excited and I wanted everything to go well. And I looked at our calendar, and our calendar said that there was training going on that day. It was what they call common task training. So you do a round robin of first aid training and other common skills. And so I jumped up and grabbed all my stuff and I ran down to the location where the training was. And when I went in there, all I saw was all the lower ranked people. All the higher ranking people were missing from there. I then asked the question of where they were, and they said, oh, they never come to these trainings. So I went to find them, and I did find them, and they were all kind of huddled in another area, drinking coffee and telling war stories. And so it became very clear to me that the culture in that organization made that okay, but the culture that I wanted in the organization was one that included everybody at all levels, and I set that expectation right away. And in order to do that, it was more than just make them go to the training and to be seen. I thought that was important because the lower ranking folks needed to see their leaders engaged and involved. But I also thought that it's important to reinforce the things that we were doing and for them to role model very specifically the behaviors that we were expecting from others. And that was a little bit of a challenge. I definitely got pushback, but I think that as you look at any organization, that should be our approach. Our approach should be that we set expectations, we set levels of accountability throughout the organization, all levels, that everybody has a role, they exercise their role, and they're very cognizant of the importance of them role modeling the behaviors that are expected from others. And so good behavior is just as infectious as poor behavior. And I think that once we can get our supervisors and managers and others doing that, thinking about that, understanding and accepting their role, we'll get most definitely better engagement and involvement across the board. And I think they can help pull others in. So.
Graham.
I think it's a fair challenge, and researchers are probably as guilty as anybody at just looking at the really sexy end of our business. You know, they like to go and play out on the flight deck much more than they like to go and stand with ground handlers or engineers stood in the rain during a turnaround. So sometimes the focus becomes on the front line because the front line seems more interesting. But as we all know, it was the tea lady who put the man on the moon, and everybody's got a role to play in enabling all of this. So it does take the management understanding what the role is that everybody plays and acknowledging that, and getting out there. You and I were in Australia last year, and Qantas. Right. And its competitor, Virgin Australia, both run a safety conference every year. And it's another of those safety conferences where the CEO introduces it. And then the test for us is always you look at, does he leave the moment that he's done the keynote, or does he stick around and talk to people? And Alan Joyce in that case at Qantas stayed for the whole time. He went to lots of sessions, he asked lots of questions, but he was there for people to talk to him. And I've seen similar things in British Airways. I saw the same thing, that people were just prepared to have that conversation, understand what roles people play. Rod Eddington, who some of you may know, was the chief exec of BA, but prior to that, Ansett and also Cathay Pacific, was famed when he came back to, or came to become the CEO of Ansett, because he didn't turn up to his office for the first week. And everybody thought that was really quite radical. And then they found out where he was. And he was out at Melbourne Airport. And every day he went and spent some time on the ramp, or he spent some time with the engineers, or he spent time in the crew room talking to people. And that became legend. Everybody talked about that. You know, wasn't that fantastic that the new guy's first job was not to decide where his degree certificate goes on the wall of his plush office. It was actually to come out and find out what it was really like for everybody, and not even just the pilots. And I think that's a good lesson for everybody.
I think that's a great place to stop. I'm going to invite Duncan back up. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott. Scott, thank you very much. I have gifts. Don't get jealous. You've all got the globes that you saw in your pack as well. These are just the same, but they're a little bit bigger because they're up here doing some work. So thank you very much, Scott. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Duncan.
And as I hand these out, I'm just going to add a few. Thanks, Graham. Very much appreciate it. Some takeaways. We talked about. They covered a lot. Thanks, Guy. In the hour, the importance of understanding how much people need to know. We're talking about getting information out to all of the workforce. Thanks very much, Wes. And it is important. I think somebody on the front line, whether it be pilot, engineer, ground ops support, they don't need to know everything about the SMS. They just need to know the key bits. So don't try and feed too much down the neck of an unwilling recipient. I think that's really important. We talked about turning it into figures for those people that are interested in figures, and some of that financial piece, I think, is quite compelling, the 5%. Just how long do you have to do whatever it is you do to pay for the escape or the accident or the incident that you just had, because it brings it into focus. And we talked about communication. And we're fortunate in CHC to have a very strong communication team, and we've done a lot of work with the communication team with safety and quality, and that helps enormously, because safety quality know about safety quality, but we don't know necessarily about how to communicate it to people. There's communication people know a lot about what hits the spot. And to touch on the point that came up about the personal incident, both the UK and the Norway team in CHC got people in to talk about accidents they'd had. And one was a construction worker who'd fallen from a ladder in one of those classic, you see the ladder falling in slow motion, and this young man landed on the ground and ended up paraplegic. And he came up and he gave a presentation to a hangar full of engineers, full of pilots, full of support staff. And for about an hour, he talked about the impact on him of that moment of carelessness, or the moment where he just took his mind off the game, and all that he had to live with since then. And he's in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. He couldn't play football with his young son. And when he got to that bit, you saw grown men, mainly in the hangar, in tears, because it suddenly struck home the impact of that one moment of non-compliance, or that one moment of taking your eye off the ball, and the impact it had on his life. And the guy in Norway, who was a fire trainer, who, through a mix-up in procedures, actually literally poured oil on the fire when he thought he was poured water on a fire, and when he thought he was putting an extinguisher on it, and the whole thing blew up, and he ended up with horrific burns, which he'll live with again for the rest of his life. Compelling stories like that really work, and working with a communication team, if you're fortunate to have a good one like we have, really does get the message across. And my final bit on the program, and I don't want everybody to go out and change the presentations that they've signed up for this afternoon, but George Santos has given a presentation this afternoon, I think in B5, where he talks about conformance rather than compliance. And that's the bit that links with the communication, is getting people to do, i.e. the culture, getting people to do stuff because they understand why they have to do it and why it's beneficial for them and their organization. So compliance becomes conformance when people do it because they get it and they want to do it, not just because they've been told to do it. So there's a great presentation coming up this afternoon through George. We may have to give him a bigger room now, but I'll endorse other people as well. I'm sure yours is going to be great as well. Yeah. So look at the program, see what we've got. Lots of human factors stuff, lots of maintenance-based stuff, and some great technology. And do go and see Guy's presentation about the mind-blowing bits that I couldn't even come close to being able to describe. I've got one more announcement, and then we're going to come to the program for this afternoon. In terms of the philosophy of the conference, so the CHC conference is all about resources, education, and sharing of information. You've got in your packs a lot of good takeaways. We've got some stuff from all the sponsors, a lot of good technical data, a lot of good aspects of different parts of our industry as well, including the insurance and the reinsurance areas, which not a lot of people know about. So there's a lot of good takeaways in there. I'd like to add one more, which we weren't able to get into the pack, but we are going to make sure you get that. And it's from Kimberly Turner, who's the CEO of AeroSafe, who's been here as a keynote speaker. Kimberly first came about 4 years ago and has been here ever since as a presenter in one way or the other. And in prep for this presentation, or this summit rather, AeroSafe have put a lot of effort into giving something tangible to all of the participants this year. So tomorrow, you will get another takeaway and a pack to take away that talks about the SMS. It's a resource kit, it's an educational tool. It links in with the IHST principle. There's one for each of you. If you do want more, please come and get it. Speak to us, and if we can give you one more, then we will do that. But it's a three-parter. Booklet 1 has got the fundamentals of the SMS. It's all lined up with ICAO, so there's nothing in there that you will be in opposition. Booklet 2 is about management of risk, and again, we've got some great presentations on risk management at the strategic level and also at the regional and sort of business end level as well. And then booklet 3 is the last, which gives you some tips and top tips about SMS implementation and how to get over the hurdles that have been seen elsewhere. So thanks to Kimberly and to the team down there at AeroSafe who developed this kit. It's coming out tomorrow. It complements the stuff you've already got on your pack, so please take one. Don't take more than one, but if you do want some, get back to us. That's that on the SMS kit. We are now going to break miraculously almost exactly on time at 12 o'clock. I'd ask you to gather your belongings because this big room is going to get split down into a number of smaller workshops. So you do have to take all of your stuff with you. But for those, the delegates, you're going to eat on the top floor where you had breakfast. For the CHC folk, and you know who you are, and more importantly, we know who you are, you're eating down at the Currents restaurant. The food's just as good, we just haven't got enough room up top. So main delegates up top to the top floor, CHC please down to Currents, and then it's into your individual areas for a 13:30 start. Thank you very much for your time and attention this morning.